philosophy right now about distributed autonomy, because that's really what's going on here. Our views of the world are being changed in a collective manner. Our collective epistemology is dependent on Wikipedia. Yet we know we can't trust Wikipedia completely because, well, there are biased people, very incompetent people, and sometimes people are not interested, so a pretty bad article is going to remain. And nobody in particular is responsible for this. We get a diffusion responsibility, which we know from psychologically that we humans are pretty bad at handling. Conversely, if we can enhance group interaction, we can get enormous effects. So I think the enhancement of juries would probably be not so much given the memory enhancing drugs or caffeine to stay awake, but improve ways of doing deliberations. And it seems that actually this suggests that it's not just the designers of technology, but the designers of human culture, the artists, the people who set up our social environment, that have an interesting moral responsibility to try to keep track of these issues and figure out ways around them. Finally, of course, since, well, given my interest and the interest of most of you in the audience, we have the possibility of disembodied cognition. We have already been, of course, connecting brains to computers in various ways. And again, by the extended mind hypothesis, I would definitely say people with neural implants and even well trained with this kind of simple EEG-based neural interfaces can actually make machines parts of exoselves. But beyond that, of course, we might be going for truly disembodied cognition by doing brain emulation. It's going to take a few decades. And before that, of course, it might be interesting to look at the possibility of like Bainbridge simulators. If we have enough information, can you actually make an agent that represents you well enough? I'm very skeptical about that agent's ability to be you. But I'm pretty certain that having agents like that as part of your exoself might be very powerful and very, very useful. And again, it raises interesting problems of your agency once it gets distributed this way outside our own bodies. Finally, well, where are we going? Well, as I see it, the border between ourselves and non-selves is becoming increasingly blurred, partially because findings in science, partially because we're actually developing a lot of technologies that are making this more important, more effective. And this is promising in many ways, because the best way of improving cognition is usually stringing together brains in a better way. That seems to produce enormous effects. And conversely, we know we have a lot of resources, mental resources, which are not used. We have several billion IQ points around here in Britain. But again, the collective intelligence of the United Kingdom is not that terribly impressive. Mostly that is, of course, because that intelligence is aimed at a lot of local problems, which I think is proper and right. But for some collective problems, if we could just get a small fraction of that collective intelligence working on it, we would get amazing effects. The problem is, of course, setting up exoselves that allow us to do that effectively. Professor Kevin Warwick, rather famous for his neural implant experiment, made a point which I still think is profound, that the really important cognitive enhancement would be a communication enhancement. And I think any method that improves our communication is going to have a tremendous practical and ethical importance. The big problem is, of course, we haven't yet figured out how to handle the kind of superorganisms and extended forms of an agency that emerge when we do this. We already have problems with the issues of collective guilt. How much should a group, like a nation, be responsible for an environmental issue? This is going to become even more complicated now when you can belong to numerous groups like Wikipedia, Twitter, the United Kingdom, the transhumanist community, or your neighborhood at the same time. And we're getting better and better at getting this extended cognition to do things. Because with greater power comes greater responsibility. The problem with our responsibility, though, is we need to be able to predict the consequences of that in order to be responsible for it. And that is tricky because we haven't developed a theory for it. All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Anders. This was really a great talk. Now is the moment to ask some questions. I think I will ask the first question myself. In the meantime, think of what you want to ask Anders. But first, since I don't see your video feed anymore, are you still here, or you still having connection problems? Well, I'm not sure if Anders is here.
Oh, there he is. There he is.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask the first questions.
All
One
right.
of the things that I find myself thinking about after this fascinating presentation, and in view of an issue which is very much interesting for most of the audience here. And also in view of the fact that Bill Bambridge is here, even if he's having intermittent connection problems. Now, you have been mentioning the Bambridge hypothesis and method of personality preservation by just accumulating a hell of a lot of information about the external and internal life of a person. You said that you yourself are not very confident in the applicability of this approach to the problem of personality preservation, and that you think that's going to take a few more decades of research anyway. Could you perhaps elaborate on this point?
Certainly. I think I missed the first part of the question, so I'm going to try to answer it anyway. I think gathering data doesn't provide us enough information in most situations to actually get all the degrees of freedom which are required to really restore a mind. The problem here is, of course, that we don't quite know how many degrees of freedom there are. The mind is a very, very simple thing with quite small amounts of information. And it's actually much more information there than you could get, for example, from storing even a video stream of a person. There are some interesting subtle questions here about how much you could constrain identity based on, let's say, the video stream ranging throughout life, for example, or taking all the emails from somebody. I'm actually planning to try to work out a serious paper about this. On the other hand, if we just gather all this information, we can also to actually formulate a model of a mind which might not be enough to be identical to the mind, or even share enough identity that the original mind would agree that is me. But it might still be enough to actually act as a proxy or an imitation. After all, in the Middle Ages, people sent portraits instead of going themselves to show how they looked. And we can imagine perhaps having a simple simulation that can guess our preferences, doing some form of economic negotiation. So I think the real problem here is we don't have enough data streams right now that gives us high information about the internal degrees of freedoms of our mind. On the other hand, our external behavior is quite accessible and can be measured. So it might be that we could just use a nearest neighborhood method to just imitate a behavior. And a lot of it is pretty normal and deterministic anyway, to at least make avatars that look and behave a bit like us.
Thank you very much, Anders. Now, the next question is Randall Kuhn. Randall, if you can switch your microphone on and perhaps also your webcam.
It's on.
Good.
Yes. Anders, hi. Can you hear me? Okay, I guess it's just my mic right now. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Yes, I can.
Okay. You just mentioned the Middle Ages a second ago. So in the old days, of course, this is not a completely new thing, this exoself, because of course back then you also depended on other people, perhaps not as much on other technology. and you communicated in chains and networks. So really, my question is, the exoselves that we're developing through society now,